Welcome back to the Nerd National Communication Center. I'm Mike, and it's Friday, August 21st, 2020, and it's time for the Nerd News. In this week's tech news, fixing Intel. Can it be fixed? What's wrong with Intel? EA stockholders are doing something strange, and Nvidia could be closing the deal soon.
First up, we have an article from PC World that's talking about some of the woes at Intel and what a former engineer thinks is the root cause of this. As you know, Intel has been unsuccessful at moving down to the 7 nanometer cadence or size for their chips, and they've been stuck at 10, and they've had a lot of manufacturing problems, and the head of their chip development recently got canned. And it's an interesting article here. I'm just going to skim over a few points of it. And what are some of the big things going on? Well, Intel has been like adding these weird, exotic instructions to their CPUs that help benchmarks look good, but are not used in the real world, and they take up a lot of space on the chip where they could have more cores. And that's what they really need to do, okay? That's one of the things you're looking at. Loss of focus. You know, Intel has kind of lost its way, and one of the reasons he says that Intel's gone this way is, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, is only the MBA degree people, not the technical engineers, are moving up in Intel. It's a fascinating read. You can go ahead and read it. You can watch his hour-long video presentation on YouTube if you want, but it's, unless you're just the absolute techno person, this is probably not the most exciting thing to watch. But Intel really needs to get back to letting engineers run the company, in my opinion. Over at AXIOS, we have an article regarding Google and search. In other words, what percentage of searches are done by Google versus Bing versus Yahoo versus DuckDuckGo. If you notice here, I use Firefox because I don't want to use the Google Chrome web browser. I also use DuckDuckGo as my search engine. And the basic upshot of this article says that on Google Mobile, because Google owns Android, they make Google the default search engine. If they didn't do that, Google could lose up to 20% of the mobile search market. So this is one of the things that happens with a monopoly, okay? And maybe Google will be forced to change this. If you remember, many years ago, Microsoft was forced in Europe not to make Internet Explorer the default web browser with the Windows operating system. I believe it would just bring up a dialog and let you choose your web browser. So in the interest of not having one company dominate everything, I choose to use DuckDuckGo, and I urge you to do the same. Now, DuckDuckGo is not as good as Google, but it's pretty good. I probably do 90 to 95% of my searches with DuckDuckGo just fine, and occasionally I have to jump over to www.google.com. But interesting article here, and you know, these big companies, Facebook, Apple's getting this now, Google, there is more and more scrutiny about monopolistic practices. Over at Ars Technica, I ran across this article where something very rare happened. EA shareholders voted down a proposal that was presented to them about raising the salaries of executives. Pretty much, shareholders vote at corporations yes or no on things, okay? Just like a democracy, but usually this stuff is a rubber stamp because the people that own the shares never bother to vote, okay? EA wanted to do a big pay raise for their executives, okay? We're looking at going from $21 million total compensation for the CEO, up from $18.3 million. And an assorted group of investors rallied against it successfully, and the plan got shot down. Good for them. If this happened more in corporate governance, we wouldn't have these abuses where CEOs are making 200 times as much money as their employees, and the company's doing lousy, but the CEO is making $50 million. So next up, there's been a couple companies getting into a very public fight with Apple over the App Store and some of their policies that Apple has. So Microsoft has been getting into it with Apple over iOS game streaming. It is against the rules for apps to stream games from the internet. In other words, where you're running the game out on a server. Google is pushing this, Microsoft is pushing this, but Apple will not allow its apps to do this. Okay, so Microsoft is going public with this, and there's been a big brouhaha over this. Now, there's the big brouhaha was actually with Epic, because Epic has now filed suit against Apple after Fortnite was pulled from the iOS store, and it was actually also pulled from the Google store, the Google Play Store, because Epic added an option to buy the game directly from Epic, bypassing the Apple purchases where Apple takes a 30% cut. And because that broke the rules of the App Store, Apple removed them from the App Store, and Google did the same thing because they want their 30% cut. Now, Epic is now suing Apple over this practice. And this is, there's getting to be more and more about this monopolistic practices on the App Store by Apple, because they have gotten so big, and certain companies can negotiate sweetheart deals, like Amazon has negotiated a lower fee. But it's what's really interesting is Epic made a parody of the Apple 1984 commercial about Apple's behavior, and I'll play a few seconds of this, but not the whole thing. I'm afraid I don't want to get a takedown.
Today, we celebrate the anniversary of the Platform Unification Directives. For years, they have given us their sons, their labor.
Well, you can find it very easy. Just go to YouTube, and it's on the Fortnite channel, and you could just search for 1980 Fortnite and find it, no problem. Okay, so this is just the opening moves in what's going to be a long, drawn out fight. Briefly, over at Extreme Tech, there were thoughts that the supply of SSD chips was going to be tightening, but prices are now expected to drop because demand is down. I'll let you read the full article over at Extreme Tech, but that's good news if you're thinking about buying a new SSD. It wouldn't be a good tech news unless we had an article about how a major company screwed up and deleted a bunch of people's data in a way that is not recoverable. Adobe evidently came out with a new version of Lightroom, and it has inadvertently wiped the user's photos and presets and everything they've done since the last time. And they basically said, sorry, we can't get it back. So, just goes to say, for God's sake, back up your data. Just don't leave it in the app. but Petapixel has all the details here. I'll link it like I always do. So over at Tech Report, I've got a follow-up article on Nvidia trying to buy ARM. Now ARM makes the CPUs that are in all of our smartphones and tablets like Apple iPads and so many different devices. And SoftBank bought it, 4 or 5 years ago for about $32 billion, and they're looking to sell it because they've made some very bad investments. And Nvidia, the video card maker, and is very interested in buying it and in negotiations. And that would suddenly make Nvidia the owner of the CPU design that is the most popular in the entire world. So this could happen very soon, although I'm not sure with the regulatory headaches how that would happen and how it would go. But this could really change the landscape of the CPU world and I think is a big threat to Intel and AMD. Getting towards the end of this week's tech news and ran across this article that Michigan News, the University of Michigan, has been working on improving transparent solar panels. So this is a solar panel that you could incorporate into a window on an office building, and they've hit a record efficiency of 8% as compared to previously like 3% efficient. So that's a big jump. That's almost 3 times as efficient as what you were seeing before. Now, solar panels that you put on your roof or you have in a solar panel farm are something like 20 to 22% efficient. So we're not talking about regular efficiencies, but most office building windows have some sort of tinting on them. So you've got to put glass windows in your building. The question is, what's the difference between a tinted, high-quality, double-paned office building window and a solar generating window, and what is the payback? But certainly it's a lot more viable at 8% efficiency than 3% efficiency. So this is over at umich.edu. I'll link it in and you can read it. Last 2 articles are just kind of feel good. They're from Teslarati, and SpaceX has flown one of their first stage boosters for the 6th time. It has launched 6 times and successfully landed on the barge. SpaceX says their boosters are designed to be used 10 times. And that might happen by next year. We have a booster that has flown 10 times. They're using their most highly launched first stage boosters right now to launch the Starlink satellites for their internet provider satellites and low Earth orbit system that they're building up, and they've got to launch thousands and thousands of these suckers. So they're going to be using their older boosters to do this. So SpaceX's 99th launch was the 6th flight of this booster. And that is much more what we were looking at and thinking space would be like and spaceflight would be like from the science fiction novels of the 1950s and 1960s, instead of building billion-dollar vehicles and throwing them away every time. So that's a good feel-good. And another article that popped up at Teslarati is Elon Musk was talking about the reusable, and he said there's no reason why these couldn't be used 100 times with regular maintenance and replacement of key parts. So spaceflight gets a lot cheaper if you don't throw your super high precision booster away every time you launch it. So SpaceX really is leading the way, and these other spaceflight companies are still years behind. So that is it for the tech news this Friday, 8/21. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be coming back with tech news again in 2 weeks. Take care.